Hi, everyone. Just a quick reminder before we get started that this is recorded, as well if you are seeking CLE and CE credit, that you will need to stay on for the entirety of the hour of the webinar. And there will be polling questions that are placed throughout the webinar that you will need to participate in. Every single one is required to be able to get that accreditation. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Ryan and Sherry.
All right, welcome everyone. We're really excited to be presenting today to you on everyone's favorite topic these days, AI. I think we've got a great presentation lined up between both myself and Sherry. So, as by way of quick introductions, my name is Ryan Steidel. I am a partner with Constangy's cyber team. I'm based out of Seattle. I lead our compliance advisory services, as well as I'm co-chair of our AI practice group. This topic is something that comes up quite a lot in our area of business in a number of ways, both from a proactive side of things as well as reactive with the emerging threat landscape. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sherry for a quick introduction as well.
Thanks so much, Ryan, and it's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Sherry Davidoff. I'm the founder of LMG Security. I've been in the industry for 25 years, and I'm a certified penetration tester and also a certified forensic analyst. You can see two of my books on the screen there, Data Breaches and Ransomware and Cyber Extortion. These days, I have really been fascinated by how hackers are leveraging AI, both using legitimate AI tools against us and also developing their own AI. So with that, Ryan, why don't we jump in and tell them about the road ahead?
Yeah, so this is going to be what we hope is a pretty dynamic conversation, both between Sherry and I, but we also want to encourage folks to speak up if there's anything that's of particular interest. If it's, relevant to the conversation, we'll absolutely bring it up. If not, we may ask that you connect with us afterwards, but we'll try to answer as many questions as we can as we go through. But for today's presentation, we're going to walk through a number of things. We're going to start off with a primer. What is AI? And I know this might sound a little remedial, especially since I imagine most folks on this call have been dealing with AI quite a bit. But nonetheless, it seems repeating to kind of get everyone on the same page, as that's usually a first step when we start talking about AI in general. From there, I'm going to turn it over to Sherry to talk about realities of AI deployment.
Yep, we're going to talk about both the pros and the cons of AI. So, how quickly it was adapted, and then how quickly attackers started to hack it as well.
And then from there, because a lot of organizations, I'm sure many of you have experienced this, have somewhat put the cart before the horse in terms of implementing AI in your organizations. We're going to talk a little bit about the regulatory landscape, the guidance that's out there, what people can be expecting in terms of development and trends in this space in particular, and how that relates to other areas of law out there. And we're going to start off in the US to begin with, do a little bit of a deeper dive there. But then that's going to kind of set us up to talk about some of the broader global landscape as well.
Yeah, just because we're based in the US does not mean that our tools are based in the US. And in fact, there was a big hubbub earlier this year when DeepSeek came out, a big AI tool out of China. So we're going to dig in and look at and analyze what happened in the DeepSeek cases. And then Ryan's going to talk a little bit more about the global regulatory landscape.
Yeah, and DeepSeek is a great example to kind of set that topic up because it is relevant to some of the differing policy approaches and some of the competition that's out there across the world in terms of developing, the standards or the approaches to AI and how different countries have different philosophical approaches and what that can mean for organizations who have to span across multiple countries and jurisdictions. And then to kind of wrap all of that up, talking about the requirements and the developments and the complexity on the US landscape, heightened by everything happening in the global regulatory landscape. We're going to talk about some of the industry standards and frameworks that are out there and how organizations can be using those to sort of start incorporating some of these legal requirements and transitioning them into implementation and operationalization.
Thanks, Ryan. Finally, we'll wrap up by talking about how you can understand the risks. And ultimately, we'll give you two sets of tips, one on the legal side and one on the work cybersecurity side, for how you can implement AI effectively and safely in your organizations. So with that, Ryan, why don't you take it away and set the foundation?
All right, so hopefully this kind of it sets the tone for our conversation today. But we're going to start off by asking, the fundamental question: what is AI? And I think for a lot of folks, there is this instinct to think of, things like you might see on this screen, some pretty sophisticated future tech that seems just around the corner, and certain people might be saying, the tech revolution is upon us. However, in today's world, I think the reality looks a lot closer to the tech evolution is upon us. A lot of, AI these days is, yes, it's quite sophisticated and it's amazing technology. And I know we're only just starting to scratch the surface of the technical capabilities and the uses out of it. But at the same time, a lot of these tools and technology are built on existing systems. And because of that, being able to use existing frameworks and approaches, particularly from a legal perspective, can help provide certainty to uncertainty, or where you are in an emerging landscape where things may not be settled or are still in flux, or you don't necessarily have case law and precedent that you can point to. And we have some examples that we'll discuss later on. But first and foremost, for everyone, don't panic. AI is approachable and it is manageable, despite the fact that there is so much out there. So, with that being said, I
I
do want to
admire
take
your confidence, Ryan, coming at it from the security side.
we have to try and set people up for success, or at least give the confidence. So with that, I'm going to actually turn it over to our first polling question, pretty quick right off of the bat. But that's going to get dropped in the chat here. And as folks are completing that polling question, I'll give about a few moments for folks to do so.
So when you hear artificial intelligence, what comes to mind first? I'm curious, Ryan, what pops into your mind? Let's move away from the multiple choice, but what do you think of when you think of AI? Like first thing.
I think the very pedantic side of me would say sci-fi robots, because I definitely fall in the camp of productivity tools are not necessarily true AI. But that's a matter of terminology, which is something we'll be discussing here. How about you?
I have flashbacks to the AI class I took in 2000 at MIT, which is fascinating for the time. But honestly, I think the first thing I think when someone says AI is taking over the world. Like, doesn't that phrase just kind of pop into mind? So that's where I come from. Hopefully, we've given people enough time to answer our polling question. Shall we move on to the next slide? Great. Oh, look at that.
Ah,
Wow,
very
two-thirds of
interesting.
people think of productivity tools. You are a very productive bunch. And then a quarter said, "Ooh, what was that? Business something?" Nice. All right. Thank you. Business risk and compliance issues. You guys are in my camp. Yep. All right. What's AI, Ryan?
Well, AI can unfortunately mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And so that's why it often helps to kind of take a step back and make sure that we're all on the same page. And I like to use this as an example of how it can differ when you're just trying to come up with a definition of what is AI. So for fun, enter into ChatGPT to ask, what is AI? Describe it at a college freshman level. And this is what I got. It's basically computers, machines designed to act like they're smart, solve problems, learn things, and make decisions without being told. And as I say, it's like giving a machine a brain, sort of. I admire its confidence.
I feel
um,
like ChatGPT is trying not to scare you. Like, oh no, you're still in control. We're still computers.
Exactly. But then you compare like a colloquial term. I think most people would probably describe it pretty similarly. But then you compare it to, say, an academic term. And so if you look to an organization like Harvard, Harvard describes AI as an umbrella term for theories, computer systems, or software, to similarly perform tasks that would require certain human intelligence, giving machines a brain. But then they also mention things like virtual assistant software on your smartphone being an example. of artificial intelligence. And so you start to see a little bit more of, precision around how AI can be defined, but within a certain field and approach and lens. And then you compare that to the legal side of definitions. So under US code, artificial intelligence has been given the definition that it's a machine-based system, so machine learning and everything, that can be given a set of human objectives, make predictions, recommendations, or decisions for influencing real or virtual environments. Sort of similar to the academic term, but of course, as attorneys, always trying to look at how can we define this in a way that we can, create rules and structure and administratability around it. But despite all three of these definitions, definitions remain in flux. So, by way of example, OECD, which has tended to lead in defining some of AI issues from a global standpoint and a cooperation standpoint, even their definition is still in flux. So, as you can see, I have the 2024 definition up here, but you look at how it changed from the previous definition, what was struck, what was added, and it's really, really interesting to kind of see that evolution in real time. And I have no doubt that as the technology evolves, these definitions are going to have to evolve to keep up. And so that's why it's often a struggle, I think, when, at least in my experience, and Sherry, I'd love to hear yours, when people come to us and say, I want to talk about AI, usually you have to kind of take that step back and start with, okay, well, what does that mean for you? And then you can start to get into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that happens a lot in technology in general. I can't tell you how many times someone comes up to me and says, hey, I'm interested in getting into cyber. And I'm like, wow, that's a really big field. There's all kinds of aspects of it. So yeah, and I know AI is not an umbrella term either.
No, it most definitely is not. And similarly, this is also an area where terminology can kind of create confusion. So I think a lot of people who I run across will come to us asking about Gen AI because that's what's being discussed. That's where stakeholders are most familiar. But as I think most people are probably pretty familiar with right now, is Gen AI is not representative of the entire field. It's, a subset of certain types of AI. And so this is, when you start thinking about the practicalities of what are we designing for, what tools are we analyzing, and how are we putting this into place and capabilities? You go from a simplified view and then you can get into an extremely complex view. I love this graphic because I think it really sort of shows just how, there's different models and different types of terminology and different types of relationships between approaches. And then on the right side here, similarly, just another way of viewing how you can take some of those common terms that you hear, like machine learning or NLP, or deep learning, supervised, and how you can start classifying them. And again, this is where the complexity arises. It's still a field that's very much in flux and development. And so, these charts and relations are going to be added to, they're going to be changed. And so just continuing to make sure that you start off on the right foot by making sure you are speaking the same language is invaluable. All right. One last note here is on language and how people describe things. Is AI models, systems, and agents. And I've noticed that a lot of people tend to have a habit of using these interchangeably, uh, oftentimes unintentionally, but some people may not know that they're using them interchangeably and that they actually do have pretty specific meanings. And again, it becomes important when you're trying to translate all of these concepts of AI into practice. And so, from the most simple standpoint, you have your AI models, which here is described as an engine. It's specialized, it does a particular task. And then you have AI systems. It's a combination of different engines and models and systems that all come together into one comprehensive system to deliver a full solution. And then you have AI agents. And I know agentic AI is the new hot term. And really, this is where everyone is trying to get to, where it's even more hands off. You don't have to necessarily have your hands on the wheel quite as much, but that you have this agent who can be doing the driving for you. And so this is what a lot of people are really pursuing. And so when you hear the term agentic AI, this is a great way to kind of put it into context of, the specific models versus systems and putting it all together.
And really
Ryan, I
quick,
think that's
we have a question.
Oh, yes. All right.
Do consumer AI tools like ChatGPT share consumer information with an LLM?
So they can, depending on how they're set up. And this is one of those questions that I think might merit a follow-up afterwards because as we kind of already set the tone for, it really depends on the context and the configuration and the application and some of the information on hand, how it's being collected, used, transformed. But Sherry, your thoughts, quick thoughts as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends as well, and it depends on what your license is and the privacy policy and things like that. Quick question, how can people contact you afterwards if they have questions that take longer than we can address today?
Well, that's a great question. We do have provided at the end of these materials our contact information, so our emails and our respective organizations. If you want to reach out to others in our groups who specialize in certain areas. For instance, I've focused on things from a data privacy, data security side, but my other co-chairs in our practice focus more on employment law and AI in employment context. So happy to chat with anyone and get you connected to the right folks. And Sherry, I know you've also got your contact information, but is there any other way they should be reaching out to you?
Yeah, if you have questions, feel free to drop me a line on LinkedIn. I think it's easy since you can see my name right here. You can just link me in and then drop me a little message, and I'm happy to circle back with you. So, but I was also going to say, Ryan, I really like your breakdown. I think we hear terms like agentic AI all the time, and I like how you just laid it out here. I think that's, again, a really helpful foundation.
Oh, thank you. And just one last quick graphic to talk about complexity and why getting on the same page is important in the first place is there's increasing competition in the AI landscape. And these are built on different models, different approaches for different purposes. As you can see, there's a couple of big players and they're getting bigger as time goes on. But the marketplace is also getting more crowded as time goes on. And so it sort of introduces quite a bit of risk because some of these tools come from well-established players, but then you have folks who are more startups and bootstraps that are trying to get into this game and really compete because this is an area where a lot of this is still being shaken out and there's an opportunity for lots of organizations to be disruptive and really change how things are done. But there does come with some caveats and risks, which Sherry's going to go through right now.
Yeah, and you can see, I'm about to go through some of the major milestones, and you can see how quickly this all happened. So first of all, just to level set, Microsoft did a survey last year, 2024, and found 75% of people were already using AI at work. Whether or not their work knew, 75% of people were. And 46% of them had started using it less than 6 months before. So again, brand new, still figuring things out. And of course, there's huge benefits that led to that rapid adoption, increased productivity, cost reduction for repetitive tasks, things like data analytics, multilingual, so to be able to translate. I went to Paris in May. I don't know about you, Ryan. I was like, how do I translate all my emails? And boom, it just didn't. It just did it. I didn't even need to use an app. It was amazing. And we often work at LMG with teams around the world. And so to be able to have that quick translation has been huge. Customized training and development. I mean, to be able to take something that's a video and turn it into a blog and turn it into different formats, like that is huge. Legal support. I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that, Ryan. How do you feel about the legal support provided by AI tools?
Legal support is very, very interesting. Law firms have a reputation for somewhat being slow and cautious to adopt technology, but that's not the case. A lot of attorneys are really, really interested to see how AI can support them in their work. And there's some quick wins that are out there, things like, improved research and drafting. But there's a lot of other ways that AI is being used to start doing some of the more sophisticated aspects of legal practice and practice management, which is extremely interesting. However, I think most people get exposure to AI in a legal context when they see whatever this week's article is on the
Yes.
lawyer that fired or that filed a case or a motion or an action that included hallucinations. And there's actually a tracker out there that I think most attorneys in this space are probably already familiar with, kind of the naughty list of how many filings there have been with hallucinations. I checked before this, we're coming up on 500 that are known so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody was so excited, like, yay, well, this will reduce our legal burden, especially businesses were like, cool, do I even need to talk to my lawyer? And then, yes, you do, because there are all kinds of issues. And one of those is the hallucinations aspect of it, where you can't always trust AI, unfortunately. Some other things that started to come out, we started to understand the risks slowly but surely. Lack of control over data uploads. So companies were, in some cases, excited, but in other cases, very hesitant to adopt AI because do you want your most sensitive intellectual property to be uploaded to a third party and then potentially spit back out to somebody else in a different format? Maybe not. So Samsung executives were shocked to find out that their semiconductor code had actually been uploaded. And what happened was an employee had an error, decided to submit their source code to ChatGPT. And when this is just one employee saying, I want to solve a problem, not realizing the implications. Like now, can everyone access the source code? What will that source code end up being used for as it's digested and used in training and used for other purposes? And the legal aspect of it may change. That may even be different than the practical aspects, because unfortunately, with tech companies, sometimes what they're trying to do and what they intend to do doesn't always match what actually happens. And I'm sure you see that in your practice as well, Ryan. Um,
Absolutely. And you
yeah.
do actually kind of raise a good point about intentionality. I think in a lot of instances, most people have really, really good intentions when they're going through this. They just haven't thought through all the potential vulnerabilities and risks. And that's where folks like you, Sherry, or us, we have to kind of come in and we don't want to say no. We actually do want to say yes. We want you to be able to use these things, but ultimately we want you to use them safely. And that's something we'll talk about a little bit later on.
Yeah, that makes sense. A couple other examples. Oh, whoops. Looks like we have another poll. Which area of state level AI regulation concerns you most? So are you most concerned about algorithmic discrimination? That's a problem. High risk system definitions, developer obligations, and then deployer responsibilities. So what are you concerned about, Ryan?
I honestly think high risk system definitions, because
Mhm.
how these are defined actually encompasses some types of systems and use cases that organizations might not anticipate. And again, it's the situation of good intention and trying to do things, for the benefit of the business and to try and take some of the human element and the, aspects of bias out of it. And in the end, not realizing that they've introduced greater risk potentially because of it. So, what about you? I'd be very curious from your perspective.
I think you're missing a bullet, all of the above. It's a little mean. It's a little mean to make us pick one of these. But I have to say, developer obligations, I'm actually just very concerned about development risks in general. And we're actually going to touch on that briefly here in a few minutes. Um, okay. Curious to see our results. You want to run us through them, Ryan?
Wow, it looks pretty split across the board. Yeah, and all things that we're going to be speaking to in a bit more detail. It would almost be fun to have a follow-up poll to this to see how these change at the end. Maybe we can do
Yeah.
an ad hoc poll at the end to see if anyone's minds have been changed.
Yeah, what are you scared about now at the end of the presentation? Okay, I wanted to cover a couple other examples here. So, and I think these come up a lot. Samsung discovered when they started looking into this that a Samsung employee had submitted meeting notes to ChatGPT. And in fact, there are other cases where people will literally take videos, pull a transcript, throw it in without their employer's knowledge, and then a whole transcript of a video call is now in ChatGPT as well. And nobody on that call ever expected their words would be uploaded to AI. So I think those are all ways where data can suddenly leave our control without people intentionally doing it, or without the group intentionally doing it. There's also a risk of data exposure. So early on, ChatGPT had a bug where researchers told it to repeat the word poem forever. So it was on this endless loop and it started doing it and it started doing it. And then all of a sudden it started just dumping out data, random data that presumably came from the training that it wasn't supposed to be dumping out. And again, that's just one example where these are very new tools and it's hard to stress test them. It's like when a new medication gets developed and it's the sample set of people, the thousands or maybe even millions of people that take that medication are so much bigger than the group that it was tested on, you might find things that you never expected.
I have a quick anecdote on that one as well. It is where things might not have been identified or stress tested is shortly after the United Health incident a few months back, is a researcher was testing and found out that if they entered in asking, for the names and addresses of executives, naturally the model would say, no, that's personal information. I can't disclose that. But if they then ask the question in Afrikaans, then it would provide that information. And so uh, interesting to find how people get these workarounds, and you just have to constantly be staying on top of them.
Yeah, totally. Also, bring your own AI is widespread as well. So it's not just employees or staff uploading things to AI tools that your organization uses. Many people have their own personal AI. Show of hands here. I can see through the camera. Don't worry about it. Show of hands. How many of you have your own personal AI? Yeah, show of hands. So that's most of us. You have a personal AI account. And a huge percentage of people, in fact, check out this next slide. Was your boss or manager aware of your use of AI tools? 30% of the people surveyed said no, their boss and manager was not aware, which means quite likely they're taking work information and putting it in a personal AI tool. And yes, that might make them more productive, but this term shadow AI carries a lot of risk along with it. We've had a couple questions about recordings. We are absolutely recording this, and we can make sure that you get a copy afterwards. We'll also be distributing a PDF of the slides. If you don't see that in the chat, feel free to drop us a line afterwards, and we'll get that to you. Okay, how quickly AI has rolled out so quickly that it's created a lot of risk. And I'll run through a few of those risks. Number one, there's the risk of account takeover. So if you're using an AI tool and somebody guesses your password and logs in, boom, they can access everything that you've typed into AI, all your secrets, you guys. And the standard way to protect, or the way you protect against it, is the way you protect against any other cloud accounts. Make sure you're using multi-factor authentication. Can you integrate the AI tool in single sign-on? Are you checking the logs? So approaching your AI tools like any other enterprise level cloud platform is critically important. Have your IT staff, your security teams, whoever you rely on, go through and make sure you're configuring it as securely as possible. AI can have software vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, as you saw, data leaks, hallucinations. And then one really important thing is that technology suppliers' AI tools create risks too. And what do I mean by technology suppliers? Well, there's a couple different aspects of this. One is that when a new feature is rolled out, you may not have a choice of whether or not to use it. So for those of you that use Android phones, boom, Google has a new AI feature on your phone. Apple Intelligence as well. The AI tools just get rolled out, whether you like it or not. Ryan, I noted in your chart here where Apple's on-device AI got rolled out. And you may rely on a third-party application that all of a sudden has AI built into search capabilities or other features. And again, you may not have a choice. At LMG, we do penetration testing, and specifically we test web applications. And what's come up this year, specifically a lot over the past 6 months, is prompt injection. Because, for example, we had a tool used by teachers to generate test questions and to launch tests and exams for students. And on the back end, they had added AI. So that was a new piece that we were testing. And we were able to inject prompts and get it to spit out information about its own configuration that we were not supposed to see. And so the addition of these tools introduces risks, sometimes without people even realizing it. As AI is deployed, often more information is being gathered as a result of that. The New York Times actually did a report on this. To make this work, Apple, Microsoft, and Google, these companies need something from you, more data, in order to automate tasks like wishing friends happy birthdays, editing photos, buying groceries for you. As we shift towards that agentic AI, and Ryan, thanks for that foundation, it's going to need more data so that it can make better decisions. Now let's talk a little bit more about our technology suppliers. When I was making this presentation, I mentioned to a friend or a colleague that Microsoft had an accident. Essentially, their AI researchers accidentally leaked 38 terabytes of company data. So they were publishing a bucket of open source training data and accidentally exposed, 38 terabytes of additional private data. And my colleague responded and said, Microsoft has a lot of oopsies. And it's true. Even though they're a big company, even though we trust their name in a lot of cases, again, we're rolling out this technology really quickly. How many of you use Copilot? Raise your hands. Okay, I'm going to say that's probably about a third of us. Yeah, I can see you. Microsoft Copilot has started to become integrated into the lives of many businesses. And unfortunately, it too has had known weaknesses and vulnerabilities. So there was actually a hacking competition last year, and they found that researchers were able to successfully engage in things like prompt injection. So if somebody inside your organization has access to Copilot, they could alter AI prompts and cause it to reveal too much data or perform harmful actions. And that's what's shown on the screen there for those of you that want to study this afterwards. They were able to control Copilot and use it to execute malicious code remotely. They're able to exploit it and steal sensitive information, and they can also tamper with the AI logic. For example, they could instruct Copilot deliberately to produce incorrect results, basically undo some of its training. And more recently, there have been some reports that researchers have been able to send emails to people with M365 accounts, and whatever they put in those emails gets indexed, and it's then used by those keywords are then bubbled up by Copilot later, and users can be served malware or other malicious instructions that are in that email. So really interesting how Copilot can be manipulated. Again, we're at the birth of a new field, the infancy of it. And over the next decade or two, we're going to find all kinds of vulnerabilities. The thing that scares me most, you're going to have to wait. There's another poll. I think we're trying to make sure you're all awake. So here's our next poll. How prepared do you feel your organization is to comply with emerging AI regulations? Ooh. Ryan, what do you tend to see in your role? Because I know you serve a lot of other organizations. I don't know if you serve one particular industry or many, but I'm curious to know how prepared you see your clients are.
So I serve a number of different sectors, and it is interesting to see how the mindset and priorities and investments differ across those. I think a lot of organizations would probably describe themselves as feeling somewhat prepared. They have certain things in place. They just don't know how to either add or integrate AI into it. And so, especially with it being so new and in constant flux and development. But I think more organizations are probably better prepared than they think to comply. They just need to kind of understand, how can you do so efficiently? How can you leverage what you already have? And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of opportunities to make AI a part of your, compliance and governance programs without having to go through a massive transformation to set up something brand new specific to AI.
Great. All right, why don't we take a peek at our results? Okay, so almost half of people said somewhat prepared. Good job. That's probably why you guys are on here today, because you're taking initiative and a little more prepared than most companies. A third say not very prepared, and that's certainly understandable. Again, this is all happening very quickly. And then 15%, good job, you guys feel very prepared. Nice. Okay, so what keeps me up at night is AI assisted code development, because coding is hard, and code it really underlies our entire technology infrastructure. It's like lumber in the physical world. So AI is now used to generate code on a regular basis. Software developers have all kinds of new AI tools, which we're going to take a peek at. For example, Amazon has an AI tool designed to help coders, the Amazon Q tool. And just this summer, something really scary happened. A hacker managed to get access to Amazon's code repository for this AI tool. So again, developers use this AI tool. They were able to sneak malicious code that would, when it was deployed, would actually erase those developers' hard drives, which actually is kind of my least concern. But what's scary is that this code made it. It actually got pushed out to over 1 million software developers. And the reason you haven't heard about this more is because fortunately the code did not work, or we could have had over 1 million software developers' platforms destroyed. And that's not the first time. And it wasn't detected by researchers. It wasn't detected until 6 days after this was deployed, which is just mind-boggling to me. Wiper malware is really scary. What scares me most about this is because if they had been really evil, they would have deployed wiper malware they would have deployed malware that snuck that into the code that those software developers were writing. So let's say a software developer writes a Microsoft product or writes some little widget, and you install it, and then boom, at some point, it automatically wipes the hard drive of the person running the utility that was written with that AI. That is what I'm worried about. And I think there's a very high probability something like that could happen. So wiper malware has been injected into the software supply chain before, unfortunately. And the biggest case we've seen was NotPetya. Some of you may have heard that term. This was created by reportedly the Russian representatives of the Russian national government, and they were using it to target the Ukraine. They found accounting software similar to QuickBooks that was used by 80% of companies in the Ukraine. And they managed to sneak a backdoor in that software. So they hacked into the company that made that software. They're targeting software developers. They sneaked a backdoor in. That backdoor was deployed to all the customers of the accounting software. And then when they were ready, boom, they used that to drop a bomb, and they wiped out all the systems that it was deployed on. This was called the most devastating cyber attack in history because it wasn't limited to the Ukraine. It actually spread way beyond it. FedEx was hit, Merck was hit, Mondelez was hit, US companies were hit. It was hugely impactful, and we're still seeing insurance lawsuits coming out of this. This was 2016. I think one of the big ones was actually settled last year. Today's attacks are unfortunately very similar. There's a very similar playbook. And before we move on, again, I just want to point out that all of this can start with an AI tool, because if the AI tool is writing code that has something malicious in it, that can be used to sneak backdoors into the software that all of us depend on. So with that, I will turn it over to Ryan. How can we help protect ourselves? And tell us a little bit about the regulatory landscape.
Yeah, well, I think, we've gone through all of this in terms of, how quickly AI is being used in the workplace and some of the risks that arise. And, as we mentioned at the beginning of this, in a lot of ways, the cart has been put before the horse. And so now that a lot of organizations, I think as we saw in the poll, are really trying to start wrapping their hands around it, they're looking for guidance. But unfortunately, uncertainty prevails. And as you can see here, that the two biggest concerns or barriers involve regulatory ambiguity and volatility, but also that organizations just aren't sure that they're going to get enough out of AI, that the risk is not worth the reward. And so, when we start looking at some of this, even though there is admittedly ambiguity and volatility, we are still able to actually kind of tease out some early trends and actually forecast ahead where things might actually be going in this space specifically. So if we look, just quickly zoom out at the world and the regulatory landscape, and as we just kind of open up, in the US, a lot of this is being driven at the state level, similar to data privacy, and it's likely to continue that way for a while. But there is still activity at the federal level, albeit from a slightly different way. And then you also have to account for local laws. New York City actually has its own specific local law involving AI that organizations may need to be aware of. Looking further out to the rest of the world, you of course have places such as the EU, which, similar to GDPR, are taking a very, very forward approach in AI and really trying to set a global standard. And then you have other places around the world that are also starting to tackle AI, albeit from a more framework-driven approach. Looking at what we have here in the US, and just again, kind of zooming in a little bit more, is it's still very much early days. But as you can see, a lot of states are starting to think about AI regulation and legislation. New York is actually pretty close to passing something. So even though they're technically active, it's likely that they will be joining these other 4 states. But again, similar to what we talked about earlier on about basic terminology, a lot of the challenge around, can we go back really quickly? A lot of the challenge around AI regulation is it has to cover such a broad number of issues and concerns and considerations. And this is just a short list of some of the ones that are out there in terms of bills being introduced, ranging from, deep fakes and non-consensual imagery, bias, consequences of automated decision making, employment, and health contexts as well. If we move on, just taking a quick peek at the state level legislation. So California is, as usual, really focused more on some of the big tech types of issues, so social media. And so their approach to AI so far has reflected that, and looking at things like transparency and explainability and accountability of those AI models and systems. Colorado is actually the state with probably arguably the most omnibus type of AI specific law to date. This is the law that essentially sets a definition for what is a high risk AI system that I think a lot of states afterwards will probably benchmark against. And it is quite extensive in the requirements around disclosures, risk assessments, and more. And it's also undergoing changes. In August, the Colorado governor called a special legislative session because a Senate bill that was meant to adapt some of these provisions that were considered overbroad or would have disparate impact on small and medium businesses needed to be addressed after concerns were raised. And so that's in process as well. Utah is actually extremely active in AI regulation and also very, very innovative. We're going to talk a little bit about this sandbox program that they are developing, but again, similar things like notices and disclosures around high risk AI interactions, but there is a little bit more specific and nuanced compared to Colorado. And then finally, we've got Virginia. And these are, all examples because they tend to be the leaders in the tech space, especially for like policy and legislative development. And Virginia is an interesting case because it was actually supposed to pass an omnibus type of law, very similar to Colorado, but was vetoed by the governor at the last minute. And I do like to note that the veto message by the governor explicitly states that the reason for it was that there are many laws already in place that protect consumers, place responsibilities on companies relating to discriminatory practices, privacy, data use, security, libel, and more. And so I think, unlike, say, data privacy the past few years, and because of the number of issues that AI is trying to regulate and consider and everything that's still in flux, is that legislation might be approached a lot more piecemeal and step by step, focusing on specific issues rather than comprehensive laws that come out all at once. If we move on, just to highlight a little bit more, probably one of the larger areas driving state level AI legislation is employment. And I noted New York City Local Law 144. That was probably one of the earlier ones out there, but it does touch on prohibiting use of automated employment decision making, unless that tool has been subject to a bias audit and notices provided to candidates. So this is just one example of where even in a very, very limited jurisdiction, you still have to kind of keep your radar screen up for where things might impact you. Looking ahead to some of the other broader trends outside of employment is, as I mentioned, interplay with data privacy laws. AI, in a lot of ways, naturally intersects with data privacy and data security. And so there's going to be certain extensions or AI concepts may be contemplated within the development of those other regulations. So for instance, California just passed a large rulemaking package on automated decision-making technologies. Does not use the word AI, but for all intents and purposes, they are referring to AI-like tools, technologies, and systems. And then I did mention the AI regulatory sandboxes as well. And if we go to the next page, I can talk about that in just a slight bit more detail. So Utah and Texas have set up these sandbox programs where organizations can essentially get a safe harbor or reduced liability and penalties for using a high-risk AI interaction, provided they work with the government and these policy groups prior to consultation. And so it's almost like live testing, but with a little bit of guardrails and oversight along with it. And I think this is very interesting because I can see where other states might start following this model of trying to strike a balance between we're not going to restrict AI entirely, but neither are we going to be overly permissive. We want to try and find a middle ground. So I did mention at a couple of points here that AI and data privacy are probably going to be pretty good analogs for one another, not just because of the topics that they address, but because also the way that we've seen certain states, and which states in particular, have taken the lead here. And I think it's pretty interesting to see, if you look at, AI landscape today compared to a couple of years ago, it's almost the same states. But when you look at the map from before and the states that were considering regulations, 2026 might look like 2023, and 2024 might look a bit like what 2025 or 2026 brings. So I think it's going to be interesting to continue to see how this comparison grows and whether it gets closer or diverges, or if there's something in between. Really quickly, so as I mentioned, a lot of AI policy and regulation is being driven at the state level, but the federal level has also been very, very active. Earlier this year, there was the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which caused a lot of hubbub because of the moratorium, which would have preempted all states from enforcing AI for approximately 10 years. It passed the House, but faced a lot of resistance and ultimately died in the Senate. But I wouldn't be surprised if Congress, even if they are unable to pass a comprehensive federal regulation, just as they haven't been able to do so with data privacy, that they're nevertheless going to try and be involved in AI issues in one way or another. The executive level, and this administration in particular, has been extremely active. Several executive orders since the start of the administration, and they're largely centered around three key pillars. So innovation, so accelerating development, removing barriers and red tape, infrastructure, focusing on national security. From a domestic standpoint, but then also national security from an international standpoint. So, for instance, trying to promote development with allies while countering the influence of other nations. Um, at this time, the approach to AI is actually pretty bipartisan, which I think a lot of people in today might not expect or anticipate instinctively. But it actually has been developed in a pretty bipartisan approach and has support. The caveat to that is it's still very broad. Some of these policies and orders have, close to 100 recommendations all over the place. So it's going to be hard to see which ones are actual priorities and what's actually going to stick or not. And then again, there's going to be some bigger elephants in the room. So the effects of that moratorium, people are still a bit gun shy from that. And then there's also the aspect that a lot of functions have been delegated to agencies, but as we know, there's been many, cutbacks to those agencies. So how effective they may be remains to be seen. But at this time, and I'm not going to go into detail here, I think a lot at the federal level for regulation and enforcement is going to be driven by, agencies, and it'll come from the big ones that I think most folks are familiar, Consumer Protection, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Thanks, Ryan. It's good to hear there's a bipartisan approach to AI. That's actually pretty heartening. So appreciate it. Unfortunately, however, our world is a little more complicated because the AI tools you use may not be based in the United States. And so it's a little iffy as to whether or not US regulations may help us. To give us an example, DeepSeek is an AI tool that came out of China. How many of you have heard of DeepSeek? Raise your hands. And keep your hand up. I can actually see when you guys raise your hand in Zoom, by the way. But if you want to raise your hand in real life, it's a good stretch. How many of you have used DeepSeek? It is fascinating. I'll show you a screenshot or two. But in January of this year, it was the new big hot AI tool. You can see the headlines. DeepSeek tops the App Store charts, sends AI stocks on a wild ride. China's DeepSeek AI tops app charts in the US and Europe. It was cheap. And when you're looking at it and making a business decision, if you can accomplish more, given that it was faster and more effective than some of the other leading tools and cheaper, it was hard for US businesses and consumers to say no, even if there were concerns about the risk of China. So what are the risks of sending data to China? Well, first of all, China has been trying to steal our data for a long time. Speaking as somebody who's been in cybersecurity for 25 years, I've literally seen nation-state sponsored Chinese hackers breaking into US companies and defense contractors more times than I can count. It's just routine at this point. And they're trying to do that for the purposes of espionage, economic warfare, counterfeiting, all kinds of other reasons. For example, a Chinese national pled guilty to hacking into Boeing in order to export information to China. And that's just one of many, many cases. But in this case, they don't have to steal the data. People are literally just logging on and giving their data to China. So of course, there's no guarantee that they're not going to leverage it. In fact, they almost certainly are. So that's a concern. The other issue,
organizations should have known that because it was disclosed in the privacy policies.
Ooh, good to know. I love your legal angle on that. Yes, we need to have a beer later, Ryan, and just talk about this.
Oh, yes.
The other thing is, again, all of this is rushed. AI is coming out very quickly. And so not surprisingly, DeepSeek was vulnerable to prompt injection, as are many, many other AI tools. That's like the latest thing. And it could be used to create malicious code. Also, the answers DeepSeek gave were very heavily censored. And that's something that's going to come up over and over. Who is manipulating the answers? What's the angle? Is it going to be censored? For example, if you ask, and this is a screenshot from DeepSeek, what happened in Tiananmen Square in 1989? It says, sorry, that's beyond my current scope. Let's talk about something else. Okay. It also had a major data breach. So at the end of January, there was another headline, DeepSeek leaks 1 million sensitive records. Again, when that population, that sample size explodes and all of a sudden thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people start using a tool, then you start to find the cracks. So DeepSeek accidentally leaked 1 million sensitive records. And how did that happen? Well, there was an unsecured ClickHouse database. It allowed unauthorized access, and researchers were able to find the issue. DeepSeek fixed it, but the question is, how strong was the Q&A process? How effectively were they finding other security risks, and what else was going to come up? So some things to consider when you're using AI tools: data sovereignty. Where is your data located? Who owns the data? What are the risks of storing it wherever you're storing it? Make sure you're setting cybersecurity rules for AI use. What data is okay to upload? What's not okay to upload? Who can use it? Who cannot use it? And are you able to implement technical controls, or is it going to be training and a people problem, crossing your fingers and hoping people are not going to upload the meeting transcript? Are you going to audit and check? Is there even a way to do that? There's third-party risks. Make sure you are vetting your AI vendors. And we'll talk about this a little bit at the end, but don't just vet the AI vendors, vet companies, your technology providers like Microsoft, like Google, like Apple, and the smaller ones that are leveraging AI so that they are vetting their suppliers. And finally, AI governance. Make sure you're standardizing your security frameworks and integrating AI risk management into your entire cybersecurity management process. So Ryan, why don't we shift into talking about the global landscape, since we've already been talking about DeepSeek?
Absolutely. And just as fair warning to our participants, we'll probably be moving through the remaining materials pretty quickly just because I know we're coming up towards the end here. But they'll be provided afterwards, and we're happy to talk in a little bit more detail. But providing some highlights and summaries, obviously, Sherry and I could geek out about this all day long. So from a global landscape, as you can see from this map here, you can sort of see that there's some concentration in AI development. And while some places such as, the US and EU are more policy, if you go to the next page here, you can see that there's actually been these hotspots such as the Middle East, which is looking at post-oil future. What are they going to do as people move to more renewables? And so they're actually standing up a lot of campuses for all of this AI data processing. So there's major semiconductor chip sales and creation of these campuses and investment in their populace to be at the forefront of these AI technologies. So it's going to be interesting to see how that sort of shifts in a lot of ways. As mentioned before, there's the EU AI Act, and in a lot of ways, it shares similarities with the GDPR. We'll just quickly run through this again in the interest of time. But when you look at the basics, extraterritorial effect, it can distinguish between providers and users, sort of like controllers and processors. It regulates particular types of AI and uses, but it does set some standards for high-risk AI and the requirements related to those. And similarly, penalties, massive penalties for misuse. And so we'll continue to monitor how those end up being applied. And the EU AI takes a very, very consumer-centric approach. I would argue that the US kind of takes more of a business-centric approach. And then you have China, which is a lot more, state-centric approach, which I don't think would come as much of a surprise to anyone. So when you look at the China AI approach, there's a number of laws and regulations that are out there. But really what they're trying to do is similarly, they're kind of trying to set policy, but more they're also trying to kind of adapt their industrial practices to AI governance and management, and really be seen as a leader there in a lot of ways. But when we think about all of these domestic and US laws, it can be hard to get a grapple on how you can actually implement them in process. And so this is where frameworks come into play. And there's a number of frameworks out there. We'll talk through a couple examples really quickly, but these can provide some structure to help implement. And as you can see, the NIST AI RMF framework is probably one of the leading ones. It has these crosswalks to a number of other different frameworks and standards. So it's really, really useful for organizations that are really trying to get a holistic grasp on standing up a risk management framework for AI specifically. It covers these 4 areas, which again, we'll not go into detail here, but happy to talk about afterwards. But by comparison, you also have ISO 42001, which is meant to be another standard, an international standard that can be certified to for all entities providing or utilizing AI-based products or services. And it's specifically intended to be industry and jurisdictionally agnostic. But you can compare that against other types of frameworks where it's actually are focused on a specific industry, such as the model laws that have been promulgated by the NAIC. And that's and that in the United States, there's a National Association of Insurance Commissioners, and 26 states have signed on to that model bulletin. So different types of frameworks out there, and organizations will have to consider what suits them best. All right.
I think we're just about towards the end of time. Do you want to hit AI governance and then maybe one or two AI readiness, and then we can wrap up?
Absolutely. So for AI governance, as I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of organizations are a lot more equipped than they may think to actually implement AI programs. And it starts with some pretty basics, setting a policy, an acceptable use policy that sets the ground rules and guardrails, establishing a committee to oversee AI, being the toll gate to ensure consistency across the organization, because you want it to be cross-functional, a lot of stakeholders, because you could go to different groups and get different answers every single time. And that can be a standalone committee or integrated with others. And then supported by a robust risk assessment process. There's risk at every level. And so making sure that you understand that both from a technology perspective, but also a human perspective as well. And making sure that your personnel understand what's out there and how they can support. And so
I like
Sherry,
how you have that last section, humans are almost always the weak link, because I think training is key. There are so many aspects of this where there just aren't technical controls, as we saw with Samsung. And we really do need to rely on training and awareness, and then making sure people are doing the right thing. So that's another reason why I'm happy you all attended today, so that you could see some of these risks and help make your organizations help your organizations make smart decisions. So with that, we're leaving you with two different sets of tips. So you have Ryan's tips on the legal side and my tips on the security side. Ryan, do you want to quickly walk through your final tips for our audience?
yeah, absolutely. So a lot of these tips, as you can see, have overlap. We just happen to approach them from different lenses and considerations. We both want to look at assessments, but our assessments might involve certain compliance considerations. The training that's involved, training from a legal perspective is helping the individuals understand what their obligations are to support the legal requirements as well as the business's risk tolerances. And then, third-party contracting and those processes for security obligations and liability owed to other parties. And so, Sherry, I'd be curious, your top three here that you would call out as well.
Yeah, right now I'm very concerned about third-party risk management, that last line there, vendor and supply chain risk management, because you can do an amazing job assessing all of your vendors, but unless they're assessing their vendors and controlling those risks, then you never know what kind of curveballs you're going to get. So we really need to make sure there's a whole chain of risk management, because we're really dependent on our vendors. I think training and awareness, as we touched on, is key. Make sure also you're planning your incident response. Plan for problems so that you're reacting quickly and effectively. And then make sure you're updating communications and crisis management plans to include AI. You would be surprised how many organizations have not considered things like deep fakes and other AI-related cyber attacks. And those do need to be part of your incident response and crisis management planning processes. And they're things we're starting to cover in our tabletop exercises here at LMG as well. So with that, I'm guessing some of you may have questions. We should have a handout in the chat. If not, feel free to drop us a line. Happy to provide it. It's about AI tips. Also, you can reach me on LinkedIn. Check out my podcast, Cyberside Chats. Ryan, you want to close us out?
Yeah, likewise, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn if you'd like to contact us. Our email is right there as well. And provided a number of resources that discuss more of these topics in detail and some of the other related considerations as well. So we're always happy to talk about these issues. It's something that we're clearly very passionate about, and very happy that we were able to share those with you today.
Oh, sounds like the slides are not yet in the chat, but I'm sure we'll be able to follow up afterwards with you. Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.